It's Thursday night, Talking Pints. I'm joined by former Labour Member of Parliament, Simon Danczuk. Simon, welcome.
Good to see you.
To the programme. Now, there you are, a young lad, a young Lancastrian, with political ambitions from an early age.
Very early, from about 14, I wanted to be a parliamentarian, in actual fact, Brought up in a very working-class family, one-parent family. My mother brought me and my older brother up. But I got a taste for politics very early on for some reason.
And yet, academically, you didn't exactly shine, did you?
No, not initially. No, I left school at 16, no qualifications. Worked in a factory making gas fires, in a factory in Padiham near Burnley. There's about 1,000 people work there then. There aren't factories or jobs like that in the country anymore, are there? Manufacturing.
No.
But that's what I did. It was a closed shop. You had to join the trade union. But what I did do is go to college at night. And I got the qualifications I should have got when I were at...
So why did you fail at school?
Well, I think really I wasn't paying attention. My home life was pretty desperate, if I'm honest about it, very poor. So I wasn't very focused. And I didn't perform. You know, my mother didn't really instill in me the importance of education, I don't suppose.
But it worked, because you worked your way up and you got elected, you know, on the local council.
Blackburn,
Blackburn,
council, 27.
You did your bit, you know, but your attempt to get into Parliament, and of course, Rochdale had that Liberal tradition. Cyril Smith, we'll come back to him. Liz Lynn, of course, had been a Liberal Member of Parliament for Rochdale, and it was a Liberal-held seat in 2010. And you had a visit.
This is true.
You had a visit from a chap who was the Prime Minister. Must have felt quite a big deal, the Prime Minister coming to help Simon Danczuk to get elected. But it all went a bit wrong, didn't it?
That's right. I'd been selected as the parliamentary candidate in Rochdale in 2007. So I was knocking on doors for 3 years. We get to 6 weeks before the general election in 2010. A phone call saying that Gordon Brown were going to visit, help me get elected, beat the Liberal MP that's sitting there. He turns up, he leaves his microphone on when he gets in the car. Who put me with that bigoted woman? Gillian Duffy.
Gillian Duffy. Just became the story.
Absolutely.
It was the front page of every national newspaper. The row ran on and on and on. So you kind of got elected to Parliament despite Gordon Brown.
Yeah, absolutely. And you'll appreciate this story. I mean, when I found out about it later that day, I'd given up smoking for the duration of the campaign. I drove to the local co-op, bought 20 Marlboro Lights, sat there on my own in the car, thinking, what's gone wrong? I've wasted 3 years of my life campaigning. But we managed to win it by just over 800 votes.
It was a whisker, wasn't it?
Yeah, out of 76,000,
And you get into Parliament, Simon, and you get involved in campaigns, and it starts in a way with Rochdale, because you write a book about the late Cyril Smith, who was a really quite monstrous man, wasn't he?
Yes. Yeah, that's right. So I arrive into Parliament 2010. Couple of years in, the Rochdale grooming scandal.
Yes.
Predominantly Pakistani men abusing white working-class girls, no doubt about that. But then I made a speech where I drew a parallel, because I'd learnt during my time from Burnley, not from Rochdale, but during my time in Rochdale, I'd learnt that Cyril Smith was an abuser. So it was commonly talked about. I hadn't known until I arrived in the town itself. And I made a speech where I compared the two. So they got away with it because they were abusing poor white working class girls. And it was for whatever reason, the police and the authorities ignored the abuse that was going on. He got away with it because he was abusing poor white working class boys. And the authorities ignored that as well. So there were parallels between the two. And then, as you say, in 2014, I published Smile for the Camera, The Double Life of Cyril Smith, which exposed everything that he'd done in terms of abuse and his politics and everything else.
And suddenly you're there as a backbench member of Parliament in your first term, but you've suddenly become a very high-profile figure as a result of that. And there's a bigger debate goes on about historic sexual allegations against very senior members of the British establishment. But the point is, Simon, in the end, many of them proved to be untrue, didn't they?
Absolutely, yeah.
I mean, there was the Carl Beach testimony,
yes.
And there were, old men whose last years of their life were made miserable.
absolutely.
Getting the balance of this stuff's important, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely right. Now, and this is where I differ, because Tom Watson took a very different view. Carl Beach, or Nick as he was known to the media, had actually contacted my office to have a conversation about the allegations he wanted to make. And my colleague, researcher Matt Baker, had a phone conversation with him and came back to me, and Matt Baker says, I don't believe a word the guy's saying.
Oh, really?
Yeah, absolutely.
So you left that alone?
We left it well alone.
Yeah.
That's a known fact. We left it well. Why Tom took it up as an issue, I do not know.
No.
But my latest book, Scandal at Dolphin Square, which is quite humorous, it deals with all these different scandals. Sid James, Barbara Windsor having an affair there. Oswald Mosley, leader of the fascists, lived there during the 30s. So there's about 100 scandals in there. But we do deal with the Carl Beach issue as well. Yeah. And we said that he was a complete fantasist and rightly put in prison.
Simon, you showed good judgment over that. But after 2015, you started to show some quite bad personal judgment. I mean, let's be frank, you were the tabloid's dream. I mean, it was Danczuk week after blooming week. Danczuk with this woman, Danczuk with that woman, Danczuk did this, did that. Some of it, let's be frank, not terribly discreet.
No, absolutely. And you know as well as I do what the tabloid newspapers...
Oh, I've been there.
Absolutely, what they can be like. And I got the full force of that. I'd gone through a divorce with my second wife. That had been difficult. I'd suffered from mental exhaustion, depression, in fact, as a consequence of dealing with some of the issues that I was dealing with in terms of historic child abuse and things like that. I struggled to deal with that. Wasn't really my subject.
Being an MP get people down?
I think it can do. You're away from the family. My youngest child was born 6 weeks before the general election. So I'd hardly ever seen him. If you were based out in the north of England and you're back at the weekend, but you know what it's like campaigning, you're out all the time, makes home life very difficult. So it can be depressing, literally depressing.
Yeah, and anyway, as I say, you were never-endingly in the tabloids and it made, well, let's be frank, very good copy for them. But you sort of survived it all. But that was it. 2017, the Labour Party didn't really want you anymore, did they?
Yeah. No, that's right. And the real truth around that feel? Well, I'd been a critic because my politics...
Didn't like Jeremy Corbyn, did you?
No, certainly didn't. No, that's the point. I'm traditional right-wing Labour. Tough on illegal immigration, tough on benefit cheats, and never got that when I arrived in Parliament in 2010. We ended up with Ed Miliband as leader, soft left. And then when he loses in 2015, which I predicted, and I've been a critic of his, I'd been a supporter of his brother David, who would have made a much better leader. Ed loses, and then Corbyn becomes leader. So I was always opposed to this North London Labour approach, which we've still got under Keir Starmer, not as radical or crazy as Corbyn, but nevertheless not my kind of Labour politics.
So that was it.
So we parted ways. Yeah.
And you've been ever since then doing media, goodness knows what. But a recent, quite extraordinary event, I mean, only Simon Danczuk could do this, really. So you finish up marrying a Rwandan beauty consultant, Claudine. What's that all about?
She's beautiful on the inside and outside. She really, in my view, in my humble view. I was over there on...
Great pictures.
We just had the wedding quite literally not a week ago or something, But yeah, I met her. I was over there on business in March 2022. We met, kept in touch. I went over again, I think, in May, June 2022 for Chogham Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting. Spent a couple of weeks there, and the relationship just blossomed. And so that's where we went.
A week into the marriage, many congratulations. But there's an issue with her visa, I understand.
Yeah, absolutely. And so we applied for a visitor visa last September. Which was refused, and they refused it. They didn't believe she would go back to the country. She thought she would stay here illegally. They didn't take into account our relationship. We provided loads of evidence about the relationship that we were in, and they dismissed it. And on a visitor visa, you can't appeal it. So you pay your money, you take your chance. But what really frustrates me about this, and I wrote an article at the time, actually, it's easier to come into Britain illegally.
Well, today, 600 have today.
Absolutely. It's easier to come into Britain illegally than it is legally and for love. That's the reality of the country that we live in.
You will sort this out, though, won't you?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, and she'll be joining us very soon. I have no doubt about that.
Well, I have to say, Simon, a fascinating, short career in elected politics, but a fascinating one.
Yeah.
As I say, not many backbenchers become household names, but you absolutely did that in lots and lots of ways. And I want to wish you a very successful marriage to Thor.
Cheers.
And thank you for joining me.
Cheers,
on
Nigel.
Talking